Did Edwin Murray have Remnant flowing through his factory? Well, kinda. Now, I know this has been a somewhat hot topic of discussion, haha, but I believe it's because we've been misinterpreting or misunderstanding some things throughout the series. Well, I'm here to propose a new idea, one that changes how we view Remnant, and explain what this means for the power source flowing through Murray's costume manor.
You are the face of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza.
Now, the best thing to do would be to start off by describing what Remnant is widely believed to be: haunted metal that is melted down into a liquid form. This idea for Remnant mostly comes from the Silver Eyes trilogy, where Afton melts down the classic animatronics into one giant Molten animatronic, and then injects the molten metal into the Funtime animatronics to control them. There's a bit of nuance to this, that being William cutting out his own organs and shoving them into the molten amalgam bit by bit, while replacing the organs he lost with those of new children he was kidnapping and killing. No, I'm not joking, that really does happen in the books. Shout out to Guts Theory. But this general idea seems to have been adapted into the games as well, where the Scooper has a Remnant reservoir and injector, which we know was used specifically for the Funtimes. Now, funnily enough, the molten substance is never actually called Remnant in the novels, but due to the similarities with what's going on at the Funtimes in the games and books, it was pretty safe to assume it was one and the same. Okay, well, based on this information alone, is it possible to determine if Edwin had Remnant? Well, he meets the molten metal aspect, but it's really unlikely the metal was possessed, especially with the sheer amount of it flowing through the factory. I mean, if Edwin was using Remnant, he should have had a way higher kill count than Afton could ever dream of, but we know Edwin isn't a killer, at least not intentionally.
It would be so much easier to keep using the spring locks. Just hire some teens to wear the suits like we always do.
Another spring lock failure? It appears you have a foreign object wedged inside. We must clear out the foreign material. First, we will blend up the foreign object. Then, you'll need a stringent steam clean to soften up the remaining organic material so we can scoop it out. Finally, we will flush out your interior with a power hose, then give you a nice long soak in the bleach bath.
But again, it's ridiculous to assume that Edwin would 1. Have the amount of souls needed to power everything, 2. The willingness to acquire those souls, and 3. The knowledge of souls and molten metal powering things in the first place. I mean, he did seem to believe in the supernatural in some form, as he believed M1 was Fiona's ghost, but he also sounded hesitant and unsure even then.
This is where I heard it. It's her or someone that sounds like her. Set frequency to 4625. Hello? Hello? Is anyone there? Over. Say something. It's me, Edwin. Over.
So, what's going on? Well, before we start getting to what I think is going on, I want to address some things. Molten metal by itself can be a conductor for energy, but that's just the thing. It can be a conductor for energy. It doesn't supply energy from itself. A quick search into if metal can be used for energy led me to an article from MIT, where it discusses the usage of creating batteries using liquids instead of solids. Here's an excerpt taken straight from the article. Subsequent investigations led to the liquid metal battery. Like a conventional battery, this one has a top and bottom electrodes with an electrolyte between them. During discharging and recharging, positively charged metallic ions travel from one electrode to the other through the electrolyte, and electrons make the same trip through an external circuit. In most batteries, the electrodes, and sometimes the electrolyte, are solid, but in Sadaway's battery, all 3 are liquid. The negative electrode, the top layer in the battery, is a low-density liquid metal that readily donates electrons. The positive electrode, the bottom layer, is a high-density liquid metal that's happy to accept those electrons. And the electrolyte, the middle layer, is a molten salt that transfers charged particles but won't mix with the materials above or below. Because of the difference in density and the immiscibility of the 3 materials, they naturally settle into 3 distinct layers and remain separate as the battery operates. Now, this can seem like a lot of jargon, but essentially what it's saying is simply using liquid metals and salt was better for storing the energy in batteries than a solid. The metal itself does not supply the energy. Editing Fazbear here. I wanted to come in because I know I just said that the metal itself does not supply the energy, but the article that I just read talked about the energy being taken from the metal itself because of the different charges. Basically, what I'm saying is that it's the metal itself specifically is not providing the energy. The metal has to go through chemical process, which is used with the electrolyte. Typically, that's, what would be a battery acid, to create that energy. It has a potential energy within itself through a chemical energy, but just melting metal down does not create that chemical energy. It is still just potential energy. And you also need very specific types of metal to be able to create that. It can't just be any metal from anywhere. It has to be a specific metal set up in a specific way to create that chemical composition. Now, another angle to take with this, perhaps the molten metal is simply being used, as the article suggests, to allow energy to travel through it quicker. While I could possibly see this being the case, the metal would then itself not need to flow from one point to another, as we see in the game. The entire point is that the energy flows through the liquid easier. The liquid itself flowing to the destination defeats the purpose of it being a liquid. It'd also be a much less efficient conductor than simply using wires to transfer the energy from point A to point B. Now, another angle I've seen argued is that the liquid flowing through is not metal at all, it's battery acid. Now, I'm not sure if you've noticed, but the talk of molten metal being used just a minute ago was a discussion about batteries. This line of thinking simply replaces the molten metal as being the thing being conducted to some form of electrolyte, typically diluted sulfuric acid for battery acid specifically. What this means is that it suffers from the exact same issue. The conductor itself is flowing from one electrode to another, which is not what batteries do. As you can see, this is not even remotely at all what's happening in MCM. Furthermore, batteries work by transferring a charge. Once they run out, they need to be recharged or replaced, meaning the liquid wouldn't itself be the power source, which it very clearly is implied to be through gameplay mechanics. Another issue with this liquid being battery acid is that it is explicitly orange, very clearly, and the most common battery acid that is used in things like vehicles and large-scale operations is sulfuric acid, like I said before, and it is see-through. Now, it does often become clouded as it picks up particulates and whatnot throughout its usage, but in its natural state, sulfuric acid is clear. Another issue with this being battery acid is that whatever the stuff powering MCM is, it is clearly volatile, explosive, and flammable. The explosion in Edwin's office is explicitly stated to be due to a new power test.
Too bad the new power test was a failure. Due to a minor detonation, there is damage to my office interior, as well as a small fire. Note to self, a portable cleaner that gets rid of smoke damage.
And we can clearly see that when things start catching on fire during the parachute ending, it is due to these barrels that Edwin has lying around in his office. The clear implication is that one or more of these barrels exploded. Now, keep these barrels in mind, they'll be very important later, but the issue with assuming these are filled with battery acid is that battery acid is not flammable. Explosions typically are created when something that is sealed suddenly has an excess amount of pressure inside that it didn't originally have, which is typically caused through the burning of a material. Think gunpowder. You ignite the substance in something, say for instance a firework, the substance then quickly burns and creates an excess amount of gases that take up more space than the powder itself did, which causes the thing it is sealed inside to erupt in order to relieve the pressure. If this substance is battery acid, it would not ignite because it is not flammable and therefore would not explode. Now, that's not to say there aren't other ways it could explode. All you need is a difference in pressure to cause it, but with the burn marks around the office and the explicit mention of fire damage, I think the implication is that clearly it was a fiery explosion, alongside the substance itself catching fire in-game that we can see ourselves. Now, another option I've heard is that it is molten metal, but the power source is simply because it is transferring heat. But if this is a belief you have, and I'm genuinely not trying to be rude when I say this, I need you to understand the basics of matter and energy. When you heat something up, you are expending energy to do so. The heat itself is energy, meaning you are using energy to melt the metal down. You would then be hoping the metal keeps enough of this residual energy to then heat something else and transfer the energy after transporting it through tubes. You would be essentially just moving heat from one point to another. This would not only be impossibly difficult for very little payoff, you would then essentially be clogging up the pipes with cooled, solid metal. The heat is the thing being transferred, and when the energy is sent from one place to another through the metal, that metal then becomes waste that lacks the energy, meaning it is cooled and solidified. Normal thermal generators use heat to boil water under high pressure to create high pressure steam, which then turns a turbine of some sort to create kinetic energy, which is transferred through the form of electricity. And guess what? Edwin also has electricity running throughout the factory. You can see the wires literally everywhere. He would essentially be using a very well-established and logical form of transferring energy that the entirety of the population of Earth uses, for the most part, that being wires and electricity, and then doubling down on transferring that energy with an illogical and more expensive form that doesn't even work within the laws of physics. Now, I know that we shouldn't draw from the real world when it comes to technology in FNAF, but when you're arguing for something that would serve zero functional purpose that also breaks the laws of physics, I think we've gone a step too far. Well, then that leaves the question. What is this junk and what is it doing? Well, let's take a look at some of the environmental storytelling in the game. That usually helps us. I think from the very beginning, we are meant to question what this stuff is. The very first task we're given within MCM is to turn the power back on, and doing so requires us to deal with this strange fluid. It's intentionally made to be odd. In the books, the team sent in to retrieve the mimic simply turned on generators to get the power running. This was an intentional difference made to the games, and it is explicitly put right in our faces as being something different that I believe we are meant to question. Given what we know about it, it's glowing orange, typically reminiscent of heat, it's stored and used in a liquid form, and it's used as a power source. Now, this doesn't give us a whole lot to work with, but with it being an intentional setup as a mystery, I think we should keep our eyes open for anything else in the game that resembles it to see if we get any answers, which leads us into a hard truth. While not exactly one-to-one, it is clearly reminiscent of the molten metal found in the recycling plant. In fact, I want to take a moment to look through the recycling plant. We start in the doll hospital, where Edwin Murray explains recycling to us.
Welcome to the world's first recycling center. Basically, we take trash and turn it into cash. To explain how it all works, let me introduce one of our many hard-working recycling automations. Say hello, Nurse Dolly.
Hello, Nurse Dolly.
Oh, that gets me every time. I thought it would be fun to go with a doll hospital theme. Pretty neat, huh? Dolly, tell them what you do.
I am recycling. Edwin Murray coined the term, and it will soon be an industry standard. I take broken stuff and turn it into new stuff. So much money is saved by reusing these old parts that we call it going green.
Because money is green, not the old parts.
Edwin is a genius. Wink.
Oh, get back to work, you. But Edwin, how does it work, you may ask? Well, we collect various discarded materials. I'm talking about broken Midway games, costumes, computer and television parts, vacuum cleaners, toasters, and precious metals. Those useless things are then used to create new Midway games, costumes, and technologies for your family fun centers at a discounted price. And what we can't use is broken down into its basic components, which we then sell at a profit.
This then leads into the area where we gather a bunch of cubes which are made of parts of costumes, which have animatronic parts inside them. A lot of people dismiss this, but the felt costumes do have metal in them. These cubes are then dropped into a giant vat of molten metal. We can see the metal here in the texture with bolts and stuff. And this area where the molten metal is created and flows to is called the power reactor core. This is very clearly saying that whatever is in this area is what is powering the entirety of MCM. Molten metal is what is powering MCM. Now, before I move on, I want to take a moment to ask to see if you would power me up by subscribing. I'm hoping to hit 15k this year, as I'm very soon planning on full launching into content creating, pumping out videos more often, and also potentially starting a couple extra channels that I'm keeping on the down low for now. Thank you. Now, let's get back into cracking this mystery. I want to take a moment to call back to something I said to keep in mind before. Remember the barrels? The ones that blew up Edwin Murray's office? Want to take a guess as to where those metal barrels come from? Hundreds of these barrels are seen sitting around the power reactor core. Now, I may not be a genius, but seeing the barrels in the power reactor core, where the molten metal is created, and then seeing these same barrels in Murray's office leaking molten metal and then exploding, and then hearing that there was a detonation that occurred due to a power test, and then seeing this same molten metal coming out of the barrels, also coming out of the massive pipes that is filled with the fluid that powers the factory, which is cooling and solidifying, by the way, disproving the idea that heat is being extracted from the metal, as it is explicitly shown that Steelwool thought about the fact that cooling the molten metal would solidify it, therefore clogging the pipes and rendering it useless. It seems very, very, very clear, if it wasn't enough already, that Edwin was messing with molten metal in a way that wasn't just related to transferring heat. If you still somehow think that, think about the fact that the metal is stored in barrels, which I feel I shouldn't have to say, but would not maintain its heat and would just solidify, rendering this act of putting it in barrels not only useless, but counterintuitive. Now, I don't know about you, but molten metal that powers things up sure does sound a lot like a certain material that we're very familiar with. But I hear you. There's no way this stuff is Remnant. We already discussed that. Which is why I said in the beginning that the stuff flowing through MCM was kinda Remnant. I don't believe that Edwin was killing people and using their souls to power such a large factory, something that even Afton would have struggled to maintain, which put me in a stump. There's clearly some kind of mystery here. They point out the molten metal to us as being a power source, and as the very first thing we see leaving the welcome show. There's an entire section of the game dedicated entirely to telling us that Edwin invented recycling and showed us the area where the molten metal came from, and this same material is what ultimately did Edwin in, as the explosion in his office came from this very same material. Everything about it was screaming that it was Remnant. Well, maybe not that last one, but I do believe it's there to tell us that there's something odd about this molten metal, but I just couldn't believe it. So, I did something I dreaded. I turned to the books. I went searching, desperate to find anything that could make sense of this. And let me tell you, I think I found a way to make it work. It starts with the Silver Eyes. In the Silver Eyes, there is a clear distinction between the type of ghost Charlie is and the type of ghost the MCI are. Shout out to Guts Theory, go check that out for more context. But to give the basics of what's important for this theory, there's what I'm going to call a memory possession and a flesh possession. An example of this would be Jake in Frights. Jake poured all of his love into the Simon doll every night, and when he died, despite not being in contact with the doll, alongside the doll not even having metal to attach to, Jake does indeed attach to it. I believe this is because of something laid out in the very first FNAF book. Charlie, when visiting her old house, mentions the thoughts and feelings of the place sticking around. The house, her old house, was imbued with memory, with loss, with longing. It hung in the air like humidity. The walls were saturated, like the wood had soaked in it. And Marla furthers this thought by saying,
I don't know. Sometimes I have little moments where it's like there's something I forgot, something I regret, or that I'm happy about, or something that makes me want to cry, but it's only there for a split second. Then it's gone. Maybe we're all shedding our fear and regret and hope everywhere we go, and we're catching traces of people we've never met. Maybe it's everywhere.
Lamar even then questions this being different from a ghost, which Marla assures is different from a ghost.
It's not supernatural, and it's not like the souls of dead people. It's just people leaving their mark on the world.
Okay, so we have this idea that there are definitely ghosts in FNAF, as this book also clearly has the MCI and their ghosts, but it also has this strange memory-like remains that stick and soak into their environments. I want to keep this in mind as we head over to the next source of information on the subject, even more books. This time, we'll be taking a look at Dr. Taggart and Dr. Talbert and their findings. Now, our first look into what's going on here is when Phineas Taggart is explaining the science behind his studies. He believes that a person can will a protective shield to protect themselves from negative thoughts and emotions by visualizing positive thoughts. The thing that had started the discussion was him asking his own body's cells to process his sandwich with love.
Thank you.
Phineas said to the sandwich.
Cells, please process this food with love.
Don then pesters Taggart and asks if his mental shield can protect from speeding bullets. And here's where it gets real interesting. Listen to this.
Speeding bullets aren't nearly as dangerous as human emotion.
He picked up his sandwich and took a bite. Frank snorted. With his mouth full, he said,
That's just stupid. My neighbor's anger can't leave me gut shot, but the old lady's shotgun can.
You're looking only at the short-term timeline,
Phineas said.
You see the result of the shotgun's energy, so it seems greater to you. Human emotion is slower to impact, more insidious. It emanates from us, or is excreted from us, if you will, like sweat or tears, and it wafts outwards like a noxious cloud, soaking into the surroundings. For some time, I've been studying the effect of these emotions. I am getting close to a breakthrough.
Now, I don't know about you, but human emotions soaking into surroundings sounds a hell of a lot like Charlie saying that her house was soaked in thoughts and memories and feelings. This, to me, solidifies that there are two aspects to hauntings in FNAF. The actual spirit of someone, their ghost, which can manipulate their environments and surroundings, and their thoughts, memories, and emotions, which soak into the environments themselves. This is most likely what gives Freddy's its creepy aura. It's the memories of the events that are soaked into the building itself, and people catch glimpses of it upon entering. So then, this gives us two very clear examples of supernatural powers that exist in the FNAF universe, the memories and the spirits. Okay, so maybe Edwin wasn't using Remnant, which is the souls, but perhaps he was using this emotional energy that soaks into things. I mean, he explicitly says that he is collecting items from all over the world to recycle, which, as we went over, the recycling leads directly into the power core of MCM. And as Marla said, people are constantly shedding their thoughts and feelings and memories into their environments. Which means, yes, the stuff Edwin collected would have trace amounts of this energy within it. Well, is there any credence that this emotional energy can even be used to power things? I mean, that's the whole purpose of the molten metal in MCM, whereas Remnant seems to be more so about infinite energy biologically speaking, providing immortality. Well, let's take a look at what exactly Taggart was experimenting with. Phineas lifted the endoskeleton from the box, and he frowned when it hung limply in his arms. He hadn't expected it to be this broken. Well, no matter. At the moment, it looked like nothing, just a ruptured metal network made to stand in for human bones. But it wouldn't be nothing for much longer.
Don't worry,
Phineas said.
I'll provide.
Phineas got right to work, hooking together the lines and electrodes of his various energy measuring devices. He set up what he thought of as an energy cascade. The machine would pour energy already captured from previous items into the first new item, in this case the plates, and then usher that energy through all the additional new items until they culminated in the endoskeleton. Phineas stepped back to watch the process. Not that there was anything to see. Unfortunately, the transfer of emotional energy occurred at a frequency the human eye couldn't discern. If Phineas turned out all the lights and used a blue light, he could detect just a bit of the energy flow. Okay, so Phineas Taggart was collecting a random collection of items that he believed held a great amount of emotional energy in order to literally power up an endoskeleton. The explicit purpose of this emotional charge was to provide power. That is practically one-to-one with what we see in MCM. This emotional energy created electric charge. Running his hands over the metal skeleton, he reveled in the electric energy dancing at his fingertips. And I feel I shouldn't need to remind you what these molten metal puzzles turn on. Psst, it's the electricity. Okay, now I feel I should mention, this emotional energy Taggart singles out is agony, but agony is not its own thing. I implore you to check out Theory Chum's video on Remnant and agony for further context. It's called Quantum Agony. But the bare bones that I'll say here is that all emotions exist within the 0-point field in FNAF, and this emotional energy gets conducted through its environment. Taggart specifically focused on the emotion of agony because he believed it to be the strongest emotion, but Taggart himself was a flawed source of information because he states that he himself has never experienced true joy. Phineas didn't bother explaining to Flynn that Phineas didn't even have a natural laugh. One of the reasons he was so fascinated by the bandwidth of human emotion was because he could never seem to access the whole range of emotions himself. He didn't have a natural laugh because he'd never felt real joy. Phineas Taggart was the one who concluded agony was more powerful through his own emotions and testing, and he himself admitted he did not experience the full range of human emotions. I think there is a very real argument to be made that love and joy are just as, if not more powerful than agony, which, if I'm being real, feels like the type of moral a story should and would have. But specifically, it's based on Jake going into the ball pit and releasing the agony of all the victims throughout Frights and turning the balls of pure gold, as well as Jake being able to defeat Eleanor in the first place, while being basically out of power due to the battery on the endoskeleton being shot. Anyways, I think that with this understanding, we can begin to piece together what was going on in MCM. Edwin Murray invented recycling, and I think unintentionally discovered that this process of melting down metal came with the benefit of carrying an electrical charge that he used to power his factory. But it wasn't that effective, as the items he was collecting weren't supercharged to begin with. But as we can clearly see in the gameplay, he is melting down his own products, Murray's magic coat racks and different costumes and endoskeletons he rented out. Yes, Edwin did make endoskeletons to be rented out. This is explicitly stated by Dispatch. And Edwin's products received a large amount of emotional charge in the form of joy and love. People genuinely did love his products before they started going bad, and he basically created a proto-emotionally charged good version of the fun times. He sends out animatronics, they charge up with joy, and are sent back and recycled for power alongside creating new products and endoskeletons. I think that this leads into the concept of Afton taking everything Edwin had and making it evil, where instead of harvesting joy for electrical power, Afton took it over and started harvesting souls for immortality. This gives room for Afton to still have discovered Remnant as we know it, while also giving him grounds to stand on to conceptualize its possibility to begin with. Now, I think it's important to distinguish between this emotionally charged molten metal and this soul-charged molten metal. So I propose we call this emotional metal either pseudo-remnant or perhaps memorant or something along these lines. I'll leave it up for the community to name. But I actually have one last bombshell to drop about this theory. Not only does this have precedent to be possible in the novels and Frights, Edwin himself explicitly talks about doing this in Tales from the Pizzaplex. At its busiest, the Pizzaplex was packed with spun-up kids and jovial families, and all the happy screams and shouts and chatter was like an electrical circuit that, if it could have been harnessed, probably would have generated enough power to run a dozen Pizzaplexes. And, scanning the boisterous crowd, he idly wondered how it might be possible to channel human joy into a machine. It had to be possible, he mused. Well, there it is. Edwin himself saying that he wants to harness human emotion to power a facility. Since Secret of the Mimic seems to adapt different parts of the storyteller into its story, like the facility replacing workers and writing staff with AI and whatnot, I would not be surprised in the slightest if the molten metal powering the factory was an adaptation of this line. Edwin discovered this pseudo-remnant, or memorant, or whatever we decide to call it, and when Afton took over his facilities, The underground tunnels that were created using this molten metal were warped and twisted into the funtime experiments and capturings to create true Remnant as we know it. Well, I hope you all enjoyed the theory. I wanted to just take a moment at the end here to say sorry that this one ended up taking me so long to make, even though it didn't end up being that long. I plan on locking in and making a bunch more once I finally quit my day job and launch full-time into content creating, and your guys' support means the world to me. And truly, thank you for watching.
This is the end of the company-wide mandatory update. We hope you enjoyed your stay here. Employees will be asked to leave comments and concerns in the space provided below this video. Please subscribe to Fazbear Entertainment to receive more company news. And remember to smile. You are the face of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Oh, and thanks for being a valued member of the Fazbear team.